Let's get it. KSAP Beats.
Yo, it's time to get wired in with that Pavelli. Welcome to another episode. So let's get wired in. So, in the beginning of this podcast, when I started, first I'm trying to be more consistent. I'm trying to post an episode at least once a week, Friday or Saturday. Try on Fridays. So look for a new episode every Friday or Saturday. Let's shoot for Friday. That seems to be what works right now. And if there's a delay, I'll release it Saturday. So I'm trying to be consistent. So 2 weeks in a row, instead of recording a podcast today and then waiting 3 or 4 weeks, I'm going to try to come out with some content every week. And I want to get back into blogging again. I used to write blogs about maybe 7 years ago. I used to write blogs. I used to do video tutorials, and I think I'm going to start doing that again with technologies that I've learned, give my perspective and my teaching style on how I teach software. So that's what I'll be working on. And I'm officially Appavelli as a company, and I know that may sound confusing. You're thinking, well, I thought you were Appavelli. Well, I was operating under Pragmatic Dev Solutions and decided just to have everything under one umbrella, which is Appavelli. So you have Appavelli, Wired In with Appavelli, which is the podcast, and then you just have Appavelli, which is the software development company. And what I strive to do is just make great software for enterprises, consumers, educational institutions, government, whatever opportunity is presented, and I'm going to build the software. So that's my goal, and never is any app developed without passion. My passion is my entertainment. So this is what consumes me. That's why I changed the name to Appavelli. It's an app universe. We live in a universe pretty much dominated by apps. So I figured that would be appropriate. And Pragmatic Dev is something that I called myself after reading the book The Pragmatic Programmer. I'm still the Pragmatic Dev, but I just feel like there's a ring to the name Appavelli. It clicks better. Even when I tell people that I do a podcast, Wired In with Appavelli, they're like, oh, Appavelli, they're intrigued by the name. So I said, you know what, this is going to be the company name. And when I'm learning about branding, it's consistency. I don't want to have Pragmatic Dev Solutions, Appavelli, and they're pretty much the same thing. So I'm excited. A lot of apps are coming in the public. I'm working on pet projects and when I work on pet projects, it's usually I'm experimenting with a technology, or I'm building something that I don't know really what it is yet. I'm just building it. Sometimes I just have a list of ideas and I just build it, and I don't know what the outcome is going to be. I just work on it. And that's how a lot of my apps are in the store, actually. They just start out as a small idea, and I said, you know what, this is pretty good. I'm going to publish it. I want to get more active as an app developer too. I want to create meetups. I want to host meetups and have users test my apps, especially for like my wedding app or my basketball app. I want to get some devices and have meetups, at a coffee shop and just have a group just test my app. That way I can interact with the users, because us as app developers, besides working with clients but dealing with consumers, you have consumers all over the world. You can have someone here in the United States. You can have someone, in Egypt or India. So, but just being able to go out and talk to people and get feedback, that's how you make really good software. Because I think all my ideas are good, and I'm like, okay, code it, but it's good to get feedback from actual users. So I'm excited. So I received my LLC on Wednesday, and I feel good about this change. It's I'm wired in all the time, wired in with Appavelli. So I'm going to be wired in talking about apps, creating apps, and it's my passion. I just love creating apps. I love developing software. And I know that I've talked about before that the app business has changed, and it has, but there's always room for another app. I just recently saw a YouTube channel. As a matter of fact, I'm actually going to shout them out. There's a guy, his name is Eric. He has a company called Overpass in the UK. So check out his YouTube channel. And he has a lot of great content, a lot of daily videos that will help software developers. I think he's been doing this for a couple years. So it's good to see other developers give back and try to help other developers. So even though I develop software, he develops software. There's room for everyone. There really is. The more options, the better. So, and he has a lot of apps. He has a lot of tips. I've actually been inspired watching his channel. He's very transparent. He'll show you how much his apps have made in the past year. He doesn't come off as a guru that knows it all, and I like it. And he has a live stream video that I usually try to tune in every Friday on his YouTube channel. So it's Overpass Apps. You guys should check that out. So this week has been a good week. I've been getting back into Spring Boot, Spring in general. The last time I really went in depth with Spring, the Spring framework, was probably my last contract. When I was building web services and web apps, enterprise apps. So Spring is just a lightweight It's a lightweight Java framework. There's a lot you can do with it now. A lot has changed. When I was really using Spring, I was mostly using Spring MVC, the traditional route, which is you have to set up the configurations in the XML file, and it was a little tedious. But with Spring Boot, it's just it gets you going. Like, you can create a Spring Boot application in seconds, and you write a quick service and get it up and running. You don't have to worry about configurations, and you can set up configurations that you need, creating Java classes using annotations. But yeah, I've been mostly working with Spring MVC using Spring Boot, but creating REST services. So I created a simple CRUD application, just to create, store, and retrieve data, update, delete. And the reason why I'm using Spring is because I've been using Jersey for the last couple of years to write my backend services. So what I plan on doing is I have a lot of ideas that are very data intensive. So I want to write the backend services and create my own web services and make sure I secure them, and then I can focus more on the front end and consume those services in different technologies. So for example, my wedding budget planner app, the back end is written in Java, and I can build the UI. I can just focus more on the UI. I didn't use Xamarin, so I built each app natively in this on this respective platform. So for Android, I use Java, and for Windows, I use C# and XAML. So I like doing it that way because I like to learn different technologies, and plus I'm pretty proficient in both languages. So and they're kind of similar in some ways as far as the syntax. So it's not that bad, but I want to work with Xamarin. So if I can use Xamarin and just have my services, consume my services in Xamarin, it'd be a lot easier. I don't have to worry about the back end, but I want to make sure I write it. I want to be able to be efficient writing my backend services. I've had a couple issues with Jersey. It's a lot of boilerplate code. And for those with a Java background, for example, when I write my service class, you have to write like a lot of annotations. You have to write the post, you have to write the produces, the consumes, and other annotations you might need. With Spring Boot REST, you can just say git mapping, and that's it. Post mapping, and a lot of things are optional. And when I write my RESTful services, I'll use query params or form params, and you have to specify that in the domain class or in the service class in the method. I prefer to do it in the domain class, which is the Pojo class in Java, plain old Java objects. And so if I have an employee class and I have integer ID, name, employee number, and I want to persist that to the database, let's say if I'm using Hibernate, I set all my annotations in that class. And then what I do is when I set up my DAO classes, data access object classes, I just inject my Pojo, which makes the code a lot cleaner. Well, in Spring, you don't even have to define the query param, form param, because Spring does some type of magic. And as long as you inject the Pojo, it'll automatically work with query params, form params. So it gives you the option, which I think is really cool. I do think if you're learning to write RESTful APIs in Java, I think it's good to know Jersey. It's a Java framework. I think it's written by Sun or Oracle. Can't remember. But I would learn Jersey. I would do the boilerplate stuff just so you can know what's going on. Because when you start using a framework like Spring, it does a lot of magic. And I know we live in a time now where, that's good because we can just focus on development. But I do think you should, if you're a true developer, in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, you'll learn how to do it yourself, and then you can use the other frameworks. So, and what I like about Spring Boot, it has an embedded Tomcat server, so it's easy to test. It gives you a lot of DevOps tools. Because I remember setting up Spring. It would take me at least an hour just to make sure the configurations were correct in the XML file. It was just a pain, especially when you're doing dependency injection and if you're doing it through XML. Now if I do dependency injection, I usually just use the AutoWire annotation, which allows the Spring container to manage the dependencies. So I've always preferred that route instead of just setting up the XML, and I don't really do that. And you can do constructor. You can inject the beans using the constructor method, but constructor is mandatory. So I would only use that if I'm handling database connection or dealing with properties in a file. So, and I'm kind of giving a small tutorial on Spring. I think that's what I might do. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to work on a small project, something simple, and I'm going to talk about it here on the podcast in detail, where I'm going to write a Spring Boot REST application, simple Spring Boot REST application, and then I'm going to consume that service in UWP and Android, and I'm going to talk about the technologies I used in both to consume this service. I think that's what I'll talk about, and I might do a video on that as well. So I might do the podcast where I talk about it, and I might just post the video so you can kind of follow along as I talk about it. I don't know yet, and then I might write a blog about it as well, because I think that'd be pretty interesting, and you don't really see a lot of people write a service in Java and UWP and consume it in UWP and show it in a tutorial. Usually you just see a simple REST app, and you can use Postman to test it, but I really want to show you how this would work in a real enterprise application. I think it's important to understand, because some people don't really understand web services. When I first was introduced to web services, I was confused, between SOAP and REST, and then I remember when I got on my first job, I had to write a SOAP service, and I was like, oh my gosh, I would get something that I'm not that great at, but I did okay, and I learned better on the job because I was developing real applications that people use, so it was easier for me to understand. So yeah, I think I'm going to do a tutorial. Hopefully by next week. I think what I'll do is I'll work on it this weekend, actually. I'll figure out some simple app where we can store data, retrieve it, and delete, and maybe even update. So I might create a CRUD application. I'm not sure yet. Or I might just do step by step. And then maybe the final tutorial, I'll just do the entire CRUD application. So I might just show how to do a Git, post. So that means if I'm showing this in UWP, I'm going to use some of the UWP libraries as well and talk about that and what's used to consume a REST API. So I think that would help. So I'm going to be working with Java and C#, building the backend in Java. Now, if you're a .NET and you know the .NET technologies, I think you should stick with .NET. You don't have to necessarily use Java, but if you have a Java and .NET background and you mostly have Java Enterprise, then stick with using the Java technologies. So that's what I'll be talking about, and that's it for this episode. It's gonna be a little short. I just want to update you guys on what I've been doing this week. Stay tuned for the podcast. I'm looking to really create some good content this year and be more consistent. But please visit appavelli.com, where you can listen to the podcast. You can subscribe on wherever you listen to podcasts. You can check out some of my apps. You can get in contact with me on my social media channels. You can follow me at Appavelli on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. At Appavelli. See? Consistency. So that's it. Stay wired in and make sure your passion is your entertainment. And I am out.